All right, I now call this meeting of the Bloomington Planning Commission to order. Due to COVID-19 social distancing, this meeting is being held mostly virtually. Those wishing to testify or comment have registered online and are either in person in City Hall or they are waiting on the phone line. So with that, we will kick off our meeting and start with roll call.
Mr. Stanzik.
Here.
Mr. Dannenberger.
Here.
Mr. Boyd. Marking is absent. Mr. Mulick. No. Mr. Krieger.
Here.
Mr. Moore.
Here.
Ms. Montney.
Here.
Ms. McCann.
Here.
And Ms. Hayden.
Here, we have a quorum. At this time, we would open the meeting up for public comment for anyone who wishes to speak on an item not on our regular agenda. Those who have comments on our regular agenda items will be invited to speak at that time. I don't believe we have anyone registered for public comment.
We did have a Ravi DeVury was registered for public comment.
Mr. DeVury, did you want to address the commission on an item not on our regular agenda? And if you want to press *6 to unmute yourself, sometimes you have to do that twice.
Yes, I did want to talk about an item not on the agenda.
Okay, then I'll open it up to you to address us at this time.
All right, thank you. Hello, my name is Ravi Zipuri. I'd like to thank all of you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I'm calling today regarding the rezoning request for Woodbine and Leslie Drive that was before the City Council last week. When I heard and read the public comments, I was very disappointed at the NIMBYism and classism on display. I've lived for over 40 years in East Bloomington. Growing up, our neighborhoods were mixed use with houses across the street from apartments. No one had any issues with it. As kids, we went to school together, played sports together, and scouts together, and no one looked down on anyone else for living in an apartment or in a single family home. If we had embraced the same attitude we saw in the public comments from City Council, there would be no Hawthorne Hills, no Hawthorne 2, no Golden Eagle, and no Sapphire Lake subdivisions. There would not even be a Royal Point or Clearwater Park. I ask you, what would Bloomington be like if we had allowed that attitude to take hold 20 or 30 years ago? I found many of the complaints to be questionable. The sidewalk on Norma is double wide because it is an extension of the Constitution Trail. I cannot see, it is inconceivable that anyone who would live on that street or adjacent to that street or in that area would not be aware that the trail is there. And so for them to complain about people walking on the sidewalk or walking on the trail is suspect. As for the development, I think it is probably welcome. That area is empty and unused, and it is a cause for excess speeding. There's no sidewalks there. It's a hazard for kids who ride their bikes or walk on the street to go to the convenience store on Tawanda Barnes. And there is a parking development. Once Sweeney Park is completed, there will be even more people trying to go to the park. And without any development, we will have still people driving at excess speed on those undeveloped parts. And again, I think there's no need to say we do not need housing of different values in our neighborhoods. You know, this is a block away from me. I live in this neighborhood. So I think for people to complain about their property values is ridiculous because they had the same complaint when the retirement home went in, same complaint when the townhomes went in, and there's been no appreciable change to house values except for State Farm quick sales from people moving in. I would just encourage you to approve again the rezoning request because there is no need to deny people the access to housing just because they are poor or don't have as expensive a house as you do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeVury.
No one else registered for public comment. Chairperson Payne.
Katie, just that is coming back before us in the next meeting. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. All right. Then with that, we will move on to item 4, which is a review of the minutes from the previous meeting. Does anyone have any additions or corrections? If not, can I get a motion?
I'll motion that we approve the minutes.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Stanzik,
Yes.
Mr. Dannenberger,
Yes.
Mr. Krieger,
Yes.
Mr. Moore,
Yes.
Ms. Motney,
Yes.
Ms. McCann,
Yes.
Ms. Hayden,
Yes.
and no one else snuck in. That is all.
All right. Minutes are approved. This brings us to item 5, our regular agenda. Katie, is staff going to do 1 or 2 presentations?
We have 2 presentations. They're separate items, so we'll probably handle them separately. And then some of the information carries over, though, such as the zoning maps and aerials.
Okay. So then we will start with item A, Z-03-21, a public hearing, review, and action on 919 West Mulberry, Bloomington, requesting a zoning map amendment from R1C single family to R4 manufactured home park. And at this time, we'll see a presentation from the city.
All right, thank you. City staff is recommending in favor of case Z03-21. This is a request to amend the zoning for 10.54 acres located south on Bike Road and north of Fuller Court. The applicant is requesting a zoning map amendment from R1C to the R4 manufactured home park district. The property is currently owned by Habitat for Humanity, and the applicant has a option to purchase the property. It's 10.54 acres. There's actually 3 separate parcels that combine, that create the property here. You can see the 3 on the screen. And it's currently vacant and undeveloped. Just north of here are single-family stick-built homes. Also south of here, single-family stick-built homes. And then east is Bike Road and the Route 66 bike trail, as well as US 55. And then to the west, the property is bordered by the Union Pacific Railroad. The property was annexed in around 1999. It's currently zoned R1C. It was when it was annexed, it had zonings of R4, which is the manufactured home park district, R3B, which is our high density residential district, as well as the M1 manufactured zoning. And this was part of a much larger annexation that encompassed the entire, there's a triangular kind of cone shaped plot of land that was included in this annexation. The property was rezoned in 2004 when it was acquired by Habitat for Humanity. The intention was to build single-family habitat homes. The area to the south was also redeveloped at that time with single-family homes, some of which were built by Habitat, others which were built by the Turnquist Family Foundation. It's kind of been a mix of residential. To the far south of here is another manufactured home park, Prairie Prairie Place, and it's also zoned R4, and it contains manufactured homes. And then there are also some R1H housing to the south. The difference between R1H and R4 is that R4 allows for a park-like configuration of housing, so multiple units on one lot. And then also R4 allows for mobile homes as identified in our zoning code. Mobile home would be housing that was existent before the 1970s. And then R4 allows for manufactured housing, which are pre-built houses that come in and are on a block foundation. Whoops, pardon me. So here are just some photos of the site. As I mentioned, it's currently vacant and unused, undeveloped. The comprehensive plan identifies this area as medium density residential. It's also a tier 1 development priority. And the proposed zoning map amendment not only complies with the future land use map, the medium density that I just mentioned, but it also helps promote a broad range of housing types, which is a goal in our comprehensive plan. Looking at the standards for a zoning map amendment, not all of the standards have to be met. These are guiding factors to help assist the Planning Commission to make their decision. Ultimately, the Planning Commission is determining whether or not the map amendment is in the interest of the city and not solely in the interest of the applicant. The R4 district, I forgot to mention, allows for up to 10 units per acre. And in the comprehensive plan, the medium density that's contemplated is 8 to 20 units. So this R4 aligns with that density. I can walk through these individually if you'd like, or just kind of summarize for you. Our analysis is that the majority of the standards are met. The site is vacant and undeveloped. Any future development would require infrastructure, streets, which would be approved during a preliminary plan or a PUD process. The property is located near Constitution Trail. It is already annexed within the city, and it's currently zoned residential. So it's already included in the kind of the planning for fire, for school districts. That conversation would have happened during the annexation when the property was developed, and during the previous rezoning as well. So I can answer any questions you might have, and staff is recommending in favor of the map amendment.
Thanks, Katie. Anyone have any questions for Katie? If not, then do we have the petitioner on the line?
The petitioner is here at City Hall.
So at this time, the petitioner, if you want to speak on behalf of your petition, I'll get your name, address, and swear you in, please.
Bobby Varicella, 919 West Mulberry.
Do you swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Please proceed.
Would you like me to talk about the whole project or just the zoning part?
Just the zoning, please.
I guess just for the zoning part of it, I don't have a lot to add from what Katie said, other than the impact to the neighborhood isn't going to be any more than, a regular residential constructed neighborhood, or, for example, Prairie Place from the south.
Do we have any questions of the petitioner? All right. Thank you for your testimony.
Okay.
If we have anyone registered that wishes to speak on this agenda item and would like to speak at this time, if you want to press *6 and unmute yourself. At this time, we are mostly considering the zoning. We will, directly after we have a vote on the zoning, talk about the plan, and that might be, if there's more substantive comments, that might be the better time to provide testimony. But if anyone does wish to speak on the zoning now, please press *6 to unmute yourself. Let me give it just another couple seconds. Sometimes technology takes a little bit of time.
Can somebody hear me now?
Yep. Can you please state your name and address for the commission? I'll get you sworn in.
Yes, my name is Joseph Taylor, 7 Eric Court, Bloomington, Illinois, 61705.
Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth?
I do.
All right. Thank you. Please proceed.
Thank you. First, I'd just like to take a minute to thank the board for listening to my comments this morning. I am a neighboring property owner to the property that is up for rezoning. I'm also a former owner of a manufactured home in a manufactured home park. And I professionally work in real estate valuation and finance. So I hope my comments are poignant and of relevancy to your process. My first point I wanted to discuss was the premise of I read through the petitioner's application that was shown online. The whole premise of the application was based upon affordable housing, and it referenced a need for housing under $100,000. But at the same time, the petition showed the options to purchase were between $100,000 and $140,000. So it really didn't seem to make much sense from the whole premise that it kind of based upon what it was going to serve. I did some more research just this morning. There's currently 138 listings in just Bloomington alone, without even counting normal, under 100,000, 45% of the current listings. From my professional and personal experience in this property, the ownership of this type of home is a poor financial decision. Just from personal experience, my father-in-law purchased a manufactured home in a manufactured home park with cash after he sold his home in 2006 at a cost of $80,000 roughly. He passed away in 2012, and it was bequeathed to his wife, my wife at the time was my girlfriend, and it came into our possession. We ended up selling the property in 2017, and at that time we were only able to sell it for a price of $25,000. If that seems like a good investment of buying at 80 and selling at 25 over the course of 11 years, then yes, this is a good financial decision. But these are the type of real life scenarios that the people who buy these properties will be faced with. There are severe limitations on what happens after they make the decision to purchase these homes, and we'll go through some more of that. First off, the manufactured home is a quicker depreciating asset because it is typically made with slightly cheaper materials than regular stick-built homes. It is notoriously difficult to sell because of the difficulty in financing. You cannot get, most of your major banks will not finance a manufactured home on leased land, which means once you own this home on leased land that you pay a lot rent for, then in order to sell it, the seller has to come up with cash. They have to find some other way of creative financing. It's much more difficult to sell, which is the reason why we had to take such a bath on the home that we owned previously. The land payment, you're paying for the lot rent, and over time that only increases. They buy these properties and think, oh, that lot rent isn't too bad. But after you've been there for 15 or 20 years and it's gone up, a couple % a year, all of a sudden those increases add up and the lot payment will never end. As opposed to owning, if there were changed to an R1H zoning, that would be something where you have a free fee simple interest in the land, and you could have some sort of actual mortgage by an through an FHA loan if you're affixed to a permanent foundation, and you could have a payment that ends, and at some point you own the land that's underneath it, and it is an investment that grows in equity, as opposed to a lease of land, which is only going to increase in lot rent into the future. The people who typically buy into these properties are typically the real estate participants, which are less savvy. It's usually the elderly and the lower income families who think these are good deals. They walk in there, they see the price, they get tempted, they say, oh, the lot rent isn't too much right now. What they don't realize is after being there for a number of years, they're going to be completely underwater. They're going to more than likely owe more than it's worth. The lot rent is going to keep going up. It's going to be horribly difficult to sell if they try to sell it. There's so many headaches that go along with it. And on top of it, once they kind of get that initial financing for the purchase, once they've been in there for a number of years, if they have large capital expenses, a furnace, an air conditioner, a roof, typical stick-built housing, a lot of people would go back and go to their bank and, refinance, take some equity out. These type of homes, they don't have that sort of equity to be able to pull out because of the difficulty in financing and because of the rapid depreciation. So what happens when all of a sudden they don't have a roof and they don't have the cash? Guess what? It doesn't get repaired. It gets patched. It gets, put off. You have deferred maintenance. Things add up. It gets in more and more of a deteriorated condition. So basically, after they purchase, what are their options? They can try to sell it on the open market like me and my family did. They can try to rent it themselves if they have the, financial capability to just go out and buy another place or rent their own place, something like that. Obviously, not something most people that are buying these type of homes are in the position to do. They can typically maybe just walk away from it if their mortgage payment is, their equity is in the negative. Sometimes, a lot of times, they end up walking away and let the park owner or the mortgage holder fight for it. Or their only other option is to sell to the park, generally for pennies on the dollar. Once they've lived there for so long and they have no other option, nobody else is willing to buy it. The only option to get any money out of it in the end, a lot of times, is to sell it back to the park. And they just kind of typically run these as rental properties after that. So in the long run, these things generally turn to rental properties instead of actually owner-occupied dwellings like would be nice if it were an R1H zoning or, the current R1C. From the park owner's perspective, obviously once they sell a home, they're almost guaranteed their lot rent because that person who purchased the home basically looks at it as there's two ways they're going to lose their house. They're either going to not pay their mortgage or they're not going to pay their lot rent. Either way, they're going to lose their house one way or the other. So it becomes a very stable income stream to the buyer or to the park owner, which I understand is an attractive investment, especially in today's market. My home is typically situated in the neighborhood to the north, Bill's Place subdivision. Would I have personally bought in this subdivision if the neighboring land was zoned R4? The answer is no. I would not have bought here. And what does that mean? If I wouldn't have bought here, there are other buyers out there who wouldn't have bought here as well. And that means that actually does have a negative effect on the value, regardless of what the borrower's or the petitioner's opinion is on effect on value. I do believe it would have a negative effect on the neighboring properties because there would be a measurable effect on demand. So what happens to these properties in the long term? The park will end up owning the majority of these homes because most others will have difficulty selling. The only person in the end that will even think about buying them would be the park themselves, just to lease them and keep the cash flow coming in. And they're generally going to be paying pennies on the dollar compared to what these were sold for new. Obviously, most of these homes are going to be in rough shape. They're going to have to be kind of pieced together by the park maintenance staff to keep them livable. But generally, they will be in some sort of state of disrepair when they're taken back. Kind of going into the more with the application and some of the inconsistencies of just reading through the application. Like I said, the application references the lack of housing under 100,000, but then presents options between 100 and 140,000. Again, it doesn't really make sense to serve their entire premise. Are these the actual houses that that are in there that are actually going to be on the property? If not, that seems very misleading. The application also had an incorrect zoning label, and it labeled an adjacent property as R4, which that is not the case. There is no adjacent property that is R4. To me, it just seemed misleading to represent the property as, there's an adjacent property as R4 when that wasn't necessarily the case. The application references a study conducted by the petitioner that the homes under $100,000 are in need of major repairs, but obviously that there was no copy of any study or anything presented with the data online. I would be curious to read such a study. Obviously, I'm sure there are plenty of options out there that are in need of major repair, but I think there are plenty of other options under 100,000 which are definitely suitable and definitely much better financial investments for any individual out there that would be looking at this price range. The application references affordable housing, but it has no real discussion or analysis of actual ownership costs. This is where my knowledge, I think, is specifically applicable here. I've seen the exact ramifications of what happens with these financial liabilities of what they become. These houses, when they're brand new, they look all sparkling and nice, and they're very attractive. And people, when they buy into these, they think they're buying an asset. They think they're buying something that they can build equity and have, turn around and sell. They don't realize how difficult it is and how big of a depreciation curve there is to these type of properties. The application also claims it increases property values. I disagree with that. Again, I talked about that. The application showed some photos of homes with very elaborate landscaping plans, but those landscaping wasn't really addressed in the actual kind of overall landscaping plan of the property. Is that going to be the case? The homes that were pictured in their application are 60 to 85 feet wide by my estimation, and the lots, I believe, were only something like 40 feet wide. So are these homes all turned on the side and the back of one is facing the front of the other? How are these actually going to be positioned? I didn't seem to have an answer to that in the application. There is actually even a statement in the application which says good behavior is detrimental to the neighborhood. Again, I read that about 10 times before I realized that is actually what it says. Good behavior is detrimental to the neighborhood. I think it speaks volumes to the level of detail that was put into the plan here. I'm sure there was a lot more analysis on the financial end, but very little plan for the plan that was sent to the public or to you, to the board. The application even, there's a reference to lean-tos, driveways, but again, there's no sort of analysis of parking or anything within the plan. I couldn't tell if there are going to be driveways, where's the parking going to be, how many cars can actually fit in there. That all seemed kind of unaddressed. There's a sample lease in the application, which has a reference to RV storage fees. It seemed like I'm assuming there probably isn't room to store RVs in this property. I definitely think that it seems like they just kind of slapped on an old stock lease from the 1980s and threw it in there. Again, I don't think any of it, I sure hope none of the actual occupants are actually going to be signing that exact version of the lease. Again, something that just thrown in there to check a box, but it is not going to be representative of what the homeowners there are actually going to be signing. The petitioner's application references a 3-strike rule for evicting problematic tenants. But this is, I had first-hand experience with this. It is much more difficult than anybody realizes to evict somebody when they actually own the home that's sitting there, and if they're paying their lot rent. And on top of it, the park owner has very little financial motivation to sell if they're getting their lot rent already. If the house is there and the people are paying the lot rent and they evict them and they force them to move the home, which can be done at huge cost, if they do that, then what do? They just decrease their income stream, which obviously they're never inclined to do. So, yeah, it looks nice on paper, a whole 3-strike rule, much more difficult in reality, and actually has very little effect in the real world. So like I said, my experience, I do have a lot of passion with this subject. My father-in-law bought a property in a similar situation nearing the end of his life, to just specifically get to a single level home, and be able to pay for it with cash and leave some sort of equity behind for his descendants. But obviously that kind of burned him in the long run. We walked away with a little bit of money, but that wasn't much at all. That sounds like a good, feasible financial. I know the whole idea of having, multiple options for housing and different, a wide variety. It sounds nice on paper, but I don't believe this is the option for this specific site or anywhere within Bloomington, in my opinion. I have nothing against manufactured housing at all. If this were a zoning request to change to R1H and give the individual owners an actual, fee simple interest in the land underneath them, I would have no problem with that. That opens up a wide variety of financing options, and gives the owner, pride of actual land ownership there. So if that were the case, I wouldn't be here discussing objecting to this petition that's before you today. Thank you for your time.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Taylor. George, can we do a quick consultation on some procedural matters?
Sure.
So Mr. Taylor's comments address not only the zoning, but I think some specifics of the PUD, which we are to review next. At this point, I'm seeing some nods. It's going to be difficult for us to consider these separately. And I also want to give the petitioner a chance to respond to those comments, many of which I think will be specific to the plan.
Right. I know that in terms of the evidence, and some of this Mr. Taylor may have to at least briefly refer to or restate, we should consider them separately. I think some of them, the ones that he spoke about in the first half to 2/3 of his remarks seem to tie in with the several factors that are listed under 17-6 that pertain to rezoning. Certainly having to do with being in the public interest in terms of the zoning itself. And I think the commission's hopefully able to separate that and ask questions referencing those remarks that pertain to the zoning factors that are under consideration in this hearing, reserving the more specific things he made statements about that may be relevant to the preliminary plan for later.
Okay, so with that guidance, does anyone have any questions for Mr. Taylor related to his comments on the R4 zoning?
I have one. Hi, Mr. Taylor. My name's Tyson Moore. Are you aware of any areas in town that are zoned R4 that have been built before that have proceeded as you characterized? It's okay if you don't. I'm just wondering if there's a reference point for us.
Yeah, like I said, we moved from out of state where I owned a home. It was in another state. I am not too familiar with the mobile home parks that are in the area right now.
Okay.
I do know from the one that I lived in that there was, obviously, was very typical of the area that I grew up in.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Taylor, I have a question. The financial arrangements that your father-in-law entered into sounded like they came out really awful. But at this point, before we can do anything with that, we have to relate that to one of the standards that we're dealing with. And the question I have for you is that in connection with the property that you described from personal experience, did this arrangement where the owners of the homes did not have a fee interest in the underlying ground have any discernible impact on the maintenance of the property and the overall value of that park and any surrounding property?
Yeah, I would say that, from my own experience, I personally, when I was living, after I was married and living in the property, we had a number of kind of maintenance issues with roof leaks and stuff like that. And at the time, as newlyweds and without any sort of cash on hand to be able to afford to put a new roof, we end up, patching these properties. We had a number of properties in the subdivision, even up and down our street, that the park bought back and kind of turned them into rental properties. And they just kind of, over the years, they did slowly deteriorate. Obviously, they they do what they can to keep them up, but they're just going to kind of keep putting a patch on everything to make it livable again for a little while, and let it continue to deteriorate until it truly becomes unlivable, and then they'll try to find a different solution. But
I take it you're stating that this deterioration in value took place even after the owners took over ownership of the homes.
Yeah, these are all homes that were sold new when they were placed on, when they were moved into the subdivision. They were sold new from a manufacturer. So everybody kind of went in there with bright and shiny homes. They owned them for a number of years, and as things started to deteriorate, they realized, oh, this wasn't the best built of home. Have problems with the cabinet doors would just fall off. They were just poorly made over time. Things just wore out quicker. And you needed more cash to be able to repair those things. And at the time, we didn't have it. So, naturally, there was deferred maintenance even on our own home, just because we didn't have the cash to do it. And because of the ownership setup, we didn't have the ability to go to a bank and refinance and take some sort of cash out of the equity that we did have, even though we had full title to it. We had no mortgage or lien against the property. We had no real way to go and, mortgage the property because of this difficulty in refinancing the property with the leasehold ownership of the land.
I understand the situation with regard to the individual owners. I guess my question was, when the owner of the park ended up, in effect, buying up these homes and basically getting into an all rental situation, was the property continuing to deteriorate, or did it end up with kind of a plateau where it wasn't great, but it was at least adequate?
I would say at the time when I left, the property was still fairly mixed. I'd say maybe the park had bought up maybe about half of them. It was a fairly large property, though. Definitely considerably bigger than the 54 proposed lots here. They had, I don't know the exact numbers on how many they owned. There definitely was a noticeable deterioration of all the improvements there, just by driving around. I mean, when these things were new, they were, bright and shiny and, looked great. But, as time went on, even the, 4 years that I lived there, I could tell a difference just in the overall maintenance of the park. So many of the homes became rented. They had to actually resort to, and so many of the homes that were rented, the renters weren't actually cutting the grass. They didn't really have an interest in that. So the park had to mandate that the park was going to cut everybody's grass and then start charging a fee for that. There's various things like that. There was all, they had a common, mailbox, and the property was regularly broken into, packages stolen, because it was kind of a one-stop shop for, any sort of thief who could kick in a door. Lots of others, just individual homes that had, noticeable, damage, missing siding, broken screens and stuff on the outsides of the homes, various things like that.
All right, thank you, Mr. Taylor. Does anyone else have any questions for Mr. Taylor? Then at this time, do we have anyone else who wishes to speak in opposition to the petition?
Could,
Chairperson Hayden.
can I suggest? Oh, I'm sorry, Katie. Go ahead.
No, that's okay, George. I was just going to say that no one else is on the call in order to speak in opposition. And we did receive an email which was shared to the commission about this case, and that was from we received one letter from Mr. Taylor, but then we also received an email from Jason Campbell at 9 Eric Court. So that was also shared with the commission. Do you want me to pull that up? That was pertaining, the subject was rezoning. But.
Yeah, George, I think you were going to chime in to let the petitioner address some of the comments first.
Well, that's correct. But if we want to just take that email, which was shared, my understanding is both of these were shared with Mr. Veritella prior to the hearing. I think that's correct, right, Katie?
That's correct.
Yeah, so maybe we will take that email, and then then perhaps get a rebuttal from the applicant if that's what he'd like to do.
Yep, let's go ahead and do the email so that we can do just one rebuttal.
Right.
Yep, we might as well just to make it part of the minutes.
So the email has two questions. It says, why isn't the field further south on Bike Road being considered for this plan unit development? This field is already adjacent to a manufactured home neighborhood. I would say that's probably more relevant to the second case. But then the second question was, what is the expected change in homeland valuation of the adjacent R1C neighborhoods?
Okay, thank you, Katie. At this time, would the petitioner like to address any of the comments that have been made? And if you can specifically, we'll focus on the zoning comments and not on the plan comments.
Hi, Bobby Varicella. I'm the developer. As far as the, I guess some of my comments from Mr. Taylor, I mean, I've been researching this type of development for probably 2 to 3 years. These are new developments like this are going around the whole country in different parts, more in the south than up here. I have Clayton Homes manufacturer. I've had multiple conversations with them on this whole project. They have financing companies already in place. So my idea is someone will come into our sales office and we'll have samples that they can pick from, and it'll be a turnkey operation to where we'll have financing in place, samples of houses they can pick from, and try to make it as streamlined as possible. There's multiple financing companies for these. And like I said, they're building these, it's a common type of development. And so they're building these all around the country. And if people couldn't finance them, companies like Clayton Homes wouldn't be able to manufacture any of these houses. As far as the lease that I have, yes, it is a sample lease. I have different attorneys in town that will draft up a lease for this particular park. We'll have strict guidelines. I have about 100 rental units in Bloomington, all with good standings with the city. Very important I'm very big on maintenance with any type of house, new, old. I'm in the remodeling business also, and you're going to have maintenance no matter what you do. You're going to have roof leaks, you're going to have siding problems. It's up to the park owner to decide how you're going to handle and maintain and regulate all the maintenance. I don't want to own an old, crummy development. It's not going to be attractive for people to move into. My idea is to have a nice new development and make it stay that way for, for future people. I see a need for not only younger people that are just getting started, but also retired people. These are big in Florida. I've toured multiple facilities in Florida like this that I'm kind of patterning this after. And you get a lot of retired people who want to downsize. They don't want a 5,000 square foot house. They want to downsize into something that's economical. They can, easily maintain, and then, go south in the winter and not have a big house here to maintain. As far as the lot rent that was spoken about, yes, there is lot rent, but there's very strict regulations on how much you can increase rent. So you can't just let someone put a house there and then say, oh, your rent's going to go up, 15% next year. There's very strict regulations for this. But the trade-off to the lot rent is the property taxes for the homeowner are much less on a manufactured house than a regular house. And so that's the trade-off. You're not paying the property taxes. But yes, there is some depreciation on the home, but it's a trade-off. Whereas as the property owner, I'm paying the land tax.
Mr. Verichel, is there anything else that you wanted to add? Or does anyone
No.
have any questions for him?
Sorry that I got off the zoning. I just wanted to address, all the comments that were made.
Yep, probably easier while that's fresh.
Right.
At this time, I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing portion for Z-03-21 and open it up to the commission. I think if we continue on, we run the risk of continuing to bleed into the second item. So, commission, a little bit of a job ahead of us on this one because we need to stick to considering the findings of fact as presented to rezone from R1 to R4 with what's in front of us right now with this case. So we heard a lot about the specific plan and definitely time to discuss the merits of that when we consider the next case. But really we need to look at what is being asked of us. So do we accept the findings of fact? And do we think that they are in the best interest of the city and not only the developer? So with that guidance, want to open it up for any discussion before a motion can be made. And again, we'll have two: findings of fact and then the potential rezoning.
I had one question to pose. Katie, maybe you could help about what the benefit of R4 would be over R1H. I was thinking R1H is adjacent to this. It still allows the manufactured home construction like the petitioner would like. Anything you could help us on with that?
The difference, Tyson, would be the type of subdivision that's allowed and the zoning use. The R1H are individual lots that are owner occupied, whereas the R4 allows for a park-like setting, with a kind of a leased pad or a leased lot, but sometimes there's shared utilities or shared infrastructure.
Gotcha. And that's why R4 allows mobile homes too.
Right.
Because mobile homes can be present there. Okay.
Right.
All right. That makes sense. Yeah. I mean, it probably doesn't surprise people to know that the information laid out by Mr. Taylor's from a financial perspective is pretty compelling to me. It seems to speak against the entire use that's in R4 though. So the idea of like leasing that land underneath the house. So I'm feeling like maybe unfortunately that's not I'm not sure that within our role that that's something we can take into account. I mean, it is a permitted use and a permitted arrangement in our zoning. And so even if we are swayed by that argument, I feel like it might be beyond our scope here.
Actually, I changed my opinion on this thing on the basis of Katie's answer. My initial feeling was that the concerns.
David, you muted yourself.
I'm sorry. I thought Mr. Taylor's considerations had more to do with the project itself rather than the rezoning, which I had initially thought was appropriate, at least in terms of the number of units allowed by the zoning. But the fact that the rezoning to R4 permits the exact type of arrangement that Mr. Taylor was talking about, whereas the R1H does not, leads me to believe that there is a real problem as far as surrounding property values and whether this change is in the public interest.
Katie, I assume the same question I asked Mr. Taylor. I assume that there are areas of town that are currently zoned R4. I don't want to put you on the spot and ask you to name one, but this wouldn't be a new use or a new arrangement to the city, right?
That's correct, Tyson. There is, I believe it's in the staff report, there's a mention of an area just south of here, Prairie Place, that is zoned R4 as well.
Do we have anyone that is planning to make a motion to adopt the findings of fact?
Just to get the ball rolling, I would move to accept the findings of fact with the exception of items 9 and 10. And I would move that those be found to be not met.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Any discussion on that? All right, roll call, please.
Mr. Stanzik,
Yes.
Mr. Dannenberger,
Yes.
Mr. Boyd,
Abstain.
Mr. Krieger,
Yes.
Mr. Moore,
Yes.
Ms. Montney,
Yes.
Ms. McCann,
Yes.
and Ms. Hayden.
Yes. That carries. Thank you, Mr. Stanzik. All right, so then the next one would be recommending that we do rezone from R1H to R4.
I think to be consistent with my prior motion, I would have to move that we recommend denial of the petition. I would so move.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All right, roll call.
Yeah, I just I'm very conflicted because I might just be repeating myself. I'm sorry if I am, but if this is something it seems to me like this is a questionable financial arrangement, and I agree with that. If it is something that's being done elsewhere in the city, I don't see why it couldn't also be done in this location. And so I think for that reason, I find myself needing to vote to allow it, even though it it does strike me as something that would be detrimental along the lines that Mr. Taylor laid out. So I just explaining my vote there and my conflicted, how I'm coming to that being conflicted.
Tyson, I'm conflicted too, but I just, as these facts have been laid out, and perhaps if it's appropriate for us to ask Katie, in this other location with that zoning, is it a similar situation where, the land itself is leased, and or are the facts analogous?
Katie's working on unmuting.
Ms. Motney, I will have to do some research on that. I'm not sure off the top of my head. I know it's a manufactured home, but I don't know the arrangement of ownership.
Is it adjacent to a single family residential? Are there other examples of R4s being adjacent to single family residential areas in the city?
There are, and it is.
Madam Chairman, I hate to be all over the place on this, but it seems to me there are some substantial fact issues that have arisen as a result of our deliberations this afternoon and as a result of Mr. Taylor's presentation. While I have some real concerns about the development, I do not want to be unfair to the petitioner. So I would withdraw my motion.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Stanzik.
I'll try this one out. Can I'll make a motion that we table this in order to gain more information about any precedent that's been set elsewhere in the city, to see if staff could bring that information back to us at a later time.
I'll second that.
I'm sorry, can I clarify, are we tabling to a date certain? Like the next agenda is fairly large, but the March 10th agenda may be appropriate.
Is that sufficient time for you? Okay, yeah, I'll table it till the March 10th date then. I amend my motion to table to the March 10th.
I'll second the motion as amended.
Yeah, so just discussion before we roll call on that one. Can we just lay out quickly what we hope to learn, what we hope the city to come back with? And I think a summary is how other R4s, our ownership structures are laid out. And it sounds like there's maybe a property value question that might be difficult to answer. So if we can just get a listing of what we hope for staff to come back with.
I would say so we want to stick to our role here for zoning, right? And not be, if someone wants to enter into a certain financial arrangement, they should be free to do so, right? I don't think that's our job to say that they can't do that of their own accord. So I just want to see if this, based on other R4 areas, are there any zoning considerations that would be different in this regard in terms of the land use or the surrounding land use? That would be what I was looking for. Some sort of distinction that could be made here to say that this is not acceptable in comparison to other places where R4 is being done. Does that help?
Katie's nodding. Yep. Yeah, so I think I'm feeling what I believe a lot of you are, is that we're feeling uncomfortable with probably if we proceed with the next item with the plan and the merits of the case as a whole. I think where we're struggling is the zoning could be appropriate. And what is our role? We're not elected officials. We're just arbiters of zoning. So I think where I'm struggling to decide to vote yes with Tyson tabling is what new information will give us that would make us consider this plan differently. I think it's the zoning for us is still going to depend on whether or not we approve the plan.
Madam Chairman, if nothing else, just identifying what types of developments are out there, and if nothing else, let us have an opportunity to look at them and see what they look like after however many years they've been there, and look at what the surrounding properties are like. That may give us some hint as to whether the concerns raised by Mr. Taylor are applicable to the developments in Bloomington.
Thanks for that, Mr. Stanzik. All right, with
It
that.
also, without just weighing in, I was just pointing out that the findings that were suggested were not met were 9 and 10. So it could generally be information relating to that, plus the two things that Mr. Stanzik and Mr. Moore.
I think that's a good point, George.
Yep. All right, with that, let's do a roll call. And Ms. Smith, would you mind reminding us what we are voting on?
I believe, I mean, there was a motion to table it to March 10th.
Yep.
Correct?
Yep, thank you.
Are you ready for the roll call?
Yes.
All right. Mr. Stanzik,
Yes.
Mr. Dannenberger,
Yes.
Mr. Boyd,
Abstain.
Mr. Krieger,
Yes.
Mr. Moore,
Yes.
Ms. Montney,
Yes.
Ms. McCann,
Yes.
Ms. Hayden.
Yes. That carries. So Z-03-21 is now carried over with date certain to March 10th, and that will be a review of R1C to R4, which would move us to the next item, PS-01-21, which is a review of the planned unit development for the same property. So Katie and George, what are your thoughts on reviewing this presentation versus also tabling this until March 10th?
I think it makes sense to table it. I don't see how the plan could be approved if the zoning's inappropriate and hasn't been approved. I don't know, Katie may have a different perspective.
I would agree, George, and I would ask Kimberly or Caitlin if they concur.
I agree also.
That makes sense to me.
George, do we need a motion on that?
Yes.
I'll move that we table discussion of this item to March 10th.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Stanzik,
Yes.
Mr. Dannenberger,
Yes.
Mr. Boyd,
Yes.
Mr. Krieger,
Yes.
Mr. Moore,
Yes.
Ms. Montney,
Yes.
Ms. McCann,
Yes.
Ms. Hayden.
Yes. Motion carries. That concludes our regular agenda for this meeting. We have no old business. New business is a general discussion on the Veterans Parkway alternative configurations, but that will be held as a separate joint meeting with the Transportation Board. So at this time, can I please get a motion to conclude the Bloomington Planning Commission meeting, and we will start our second meeting.
Ms. Hayden, I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt, but I just realized we received 2 public comments as well around 2 o'clock today. They were emailed in, and I'm forwarding those on to the commission, but they were from Tate Skinner and Nunya Bidness.
Okay. So we'll enter these into the record for the public comment portion. I think the comments are the same. Yeah, okay. And they were related to the public comment that we heard in person. Okay. All right, thank you, Katie. Did we have a motion on adjourning planning commission meeting?
This is Justin. I'll motion to adjourn.
Can we get a second? All in favor?
Aye.
All right, this concludes the Bloomington Planning Commission meeting, and we'll switch over to our other meeting.
Could we have a 3-minute break before then?
Yes, we'll take a 3-minute break. See you at 5:10.